Oh, hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world and when you are watching this session. We're here today with Natalia Uribe Martinez as part of the Resourcing 22 Virtual Conference Reality Check on Responsible Sourcing, Trends, Obstacles, and Opportunities. We are with Natalia today to discuss one topic which is also being discussed in one of the main sessions of the conference, which is in search of a common agenda, aligning EU and Latin American visions for sustainability and responsible sourcing of minerals. This is a conversation at Resourcing we started some time ago already, where we had the first Global Advocacy Forum in Chile in June 2022, where we started diving into the differences and commonalities between EU and Latin America regarding the conception of responsible sourcing. So what is responsible sourcing in a producing versus an importing country? And how can the two continents find a common ground to align their own visions on responsible sourcing and actually act upon it for the construction of secure and resilient supply chains? Today, we have Natalia Uribe Martinez, who is the Standards and Assurance Manager at the Alliance for Responsible Mining. She has a background in development studies with an emphasis on economic development. And since 2014, she's been working in the Alliance for Responsible Mining, particularly regarding the creation, governance, assurance, and maintenance of standards, such as Fairmined and craft, as well as in the management of project activities. The Alliance for Responsible Mining is a key actor that has been introducing itself as an expert in the field, really working together with communities and multi-stakeholders to make artisanal and small-scale mining a legitimate actor in mineral supply chains. Natalia, without going any further, I would like to give the word to you. Just for the people listening in, we will have a short presentation by Natalia, around 15 minutes, followed by a Q&A of other 15 minutes. So the session is expected to last around 30 minutes. Natalia, please, the floor, or to better say, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate the kind invitation to be part of the Resourcing Conference 2022. And I'm very happy to provide also a perspective of the global NGO, the Alliance for Responsible Mining. To this conversation about what is responsible mining and what is responsible sourcing. We are specialized in the creation and implementation of voluntary sustainability standards for artisanal and small-scale mining sector. First and all, in this conversation, I think that we need to be clear what sector I'm talking about, the artisanal and small-scale mining. The ASM is the big mining in social impact and employment creation. Many people might be more familiar with large or medium-scale companies, but today I want to show you the realities and the potential to contribute to development with the ASM sector. Even it's actually surprising how few people know about this sector, given its scale and presence around the world. ASM of different minerals, precious stones, diamonds, are estimated at almost 50 million people in over 120 countries worldwide. Around a quarter of this number are women. For gold, the estimate is about 20 million people, producing about 20% of output, over 500 tons of gold per year, worth over $3 billion. This is a lot of employment and a lot of value created that mostly stay within local economies, such as Latin America or Africa. And this provides livelihood for entire communities in places where other options are scarce. Now, we know that the sector has some challenges as well. Mining is hard and dangerous work. There are sometimes accidents, health problems, environmental degradation, mercury pollution, sometimes child labor, in extreme conditions also forced labor linked with conflict and armed groups. However, we need to be careful before judging them too harsh. From a perspective of developed economy or from the EU economies, the sector operates in a context of limited resources, lack of education, condition of informality. In some developing economies, roughly 50 and 90% of the employment is informal, trade, agriculture, transport. Why should mining be different? And the sector also need to be considered in this informality and seen, because when you don't have the security of tenure, you won't invest in security or better equipment. Anyway, you can't forget about getting a credit. Sometimes getting a bank account can be a miracle. The tax system, logistic, legal norms are mostly created with large-scale mining in mind, and not a small-scale mining sector, and the informality point I mentioned you. Despite all these challenges, the sector has an incredible potential to contribute to local and national development. So maybe the most important point here is people need work. Then ASM is the only choice of employment or a preferred option, even this difficult situation I am presenting. Now, I want to talk about the Alliance for Responsible Mining and what we do. We are born and headquartered in Colombia, and current presence on the ground in Peru, in Honduras, in Guyana, in Burkina Faso. We are dedicated to promoting and facilitating responsible artisanal and small-scale mining as a sustainable development opportunity. In the last 15 years, we have worked over 25 countries, and we are known to create under multi-stakeholder approach with participation of artisanal miners in the core of these discussions, sustainability standards dedicated to the sector, which are the craft code and the Fairmined standard. The origin of the initiative is connected with the Green Gold initiative, that it has also a connection with the European jurors, because it was the first local certification system that joined the Afro-descendant miners from Chocó, Colombia, and the ethical European jurors, and then are created the first standard in the world to define ASM in 2007. Now we have, as part of our work to create this conceptualization, these standards, we have two, as I say. So the first one was the Fairmined standard, developed since 2009, to define how responsible ASM should look like, including the international frameworks of human rights, labor, due diligence, environment, mercury, and to prove that the work that is possible to achieve it with right support and incentives. Fairmined, for those days, was created with the participation of 130 actors from Latin America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. Then, in 2018, with result, we led the development of the craft code to promote the early engagement of the market players in a progressive approach aligned with the OECD due diligence guidance, and this standard was also was created as part of the support of the European Partnership for Responsible Minerals. So we joined a coalition of supply chain actors, including artisanal miners, contribution from 25 countries and 900 participants in 2019 and 2020. Both standards, the craft code and the Fairmined, are described as multi-stakeholder process. Why? Because are inclusive, participatory, to offer legitimacy, transparency, and it have included over 500 stakeholders, both consultations of the standards to ensure a broad dialogue and legitimacy. Now, talking more in details, both we can say that craft and Fairmined are the evidence that it's possible to have a definition of responsible ASM from the early stage to more advanced miners. How to address the risks, how to contribute to the sustainable development goals. The miners have shown with examples around the world that they can adopt, but they require the support and from the government and from the industry to make that work. Now I want to show what are the themes covered in the standards. So maybe you have a better idea what I'm talking about. What is the craft code? The craft code is basically a common language of translation of the OECD Annex to risks, human rights violations, money laundering, bribery, forced labor, workforce or child labor, to practical mitigation actions taken by the miners. It covers different minerals, gold, cobalt, 3T, color gemstones, and it can be easily adopted and incorporated into corporate sourcing policies because it's open source. So it's a way that the buyers can engage with the sector, and it's a way that the miners can show the efforts of mitigation, the efforts. Now, what is Fairmined? Fairmined is an assurance label that certifies gold from empowered, responsible, artisanal, and small-scale mining organizations. Thanks to the Fairmined certification, anyone who buys gold can support responsible managed community mines. Fairmined model is open to all market players to make a positive impact on responsible mining. Fairmined has something additional that is a rigorous third-party certification and audit system that ensure that the artisanal miners organizations meet world-leading standards for responsible practices, delivering organizational, social development, environmental protection, gender inclusion, and traceability. The miners receive, when they are certified, first recognition, second, they receive fair price for their minerals, and they also receive an incentive of $4,000 per gram of gold to invest in their technical, environmental, social improvement. Now that you have a clear idea what are these standards, it's important also to mention you the recognition that have acquired this standard, because from the perspective for the corporates is also necessary. So for the companies, both are recognized. Craft and Fairmined are recognized as a mechanism to engage with the ASM. The recognition comes from the OECD and industry standards such as LBMA, RJC, RMI, and IRMA. Now, talking more about impacts and what are the lessons learned of this implementation of this framework about responsible mining and sourcing. Fairmined continues to be this horizon, the goal to be proud of, and the easy way to integrate the artisanal and small-scale miner into supply chains. For instance, Fairmined certification have currently 393 brands and refineries in 33 countries are involved, and mostly of the countries are in the EU, mostly through Fairmined, having sold over 1.7 tons of gold and earning the miners a premium of $6.5 million US. Now that the climate change action are urgent, I also want to bring like a figure that might be interesting in this conversation about responsibility, is that the certified mines considerably contribute to very low CO2 emissions. They produce 6 times less CO2 equivalent per kilogram of gold in comparison with the best LSM performance, and more than 50 times less CO2 per person employed. In certified mines, over 3,300 workers were guaranteed decent employment conditions, formal contract, regulated working hours, social security, professional protective equipment, and safe work environment. This, of course, might be obvious for many of you, but it's quite extraordinary in the ASM context. Just some examples to recreate what I'm just telling. This change, this positive transformation are from La Gabriela. This is a certified mine located in Colombia. The certification was granted in 2021. They share activities with cultivation of cocoa, rubber, and they are committed with the environment and their people. They are not using mercury, they are caring their environment and showing that the ASM is possible even in conflict affected areas. Then we can move to Peru. In Peru, Secomib was certified in 2016, the first one in the Oropuno region. Secomib with other 2 mines that are also certifying like make like a small cluster of responsible mining in Peru. And they provide quality employment to over 250 people and their families that imply more or less 1,000 people locally. They use, for instance, the premium, this incentive that gives Fairmined to purchase processing plant, to also eliminate the use of mercury. A group of women who were working previously with mercury mining set up a yearly workshop, and they're associated of the cooperative. And moving also to Central America, another case that this is not certified, but it's also they are applying, for instance, the craft code, and it's a way to show that even you can the miners can stay like step by step toward this sustainability pathway. This case, it was a large-scale mining organization transferred the mining title to a community, so they have to start from the scratch, building the organizational structure, internal rule, regulation, work organization. So it has been a building community mining from zero, let's say. And they have been committing, advancing in their development and adopting, for instance, the craft code as the framework of internal management. To finalize my presentations, I want to say that consolidating these lessons learned with the standard implementation, the Alliance for Responsible Mining proposed the Sustainable Mines Program. This is a statewide sourcing scheme for responsible ASM based on the application of the craft code and integrating the Fairmined Certification. What we want to do with the Sustainable Mines Program, we want to take the partnership to the next level, giving the companies flexible options to get involved with the sector. We want to help to cost-effective due diligence process, align with the OECD due diligence practices, provide transparent information of the mines, the progress, their impact linked with the SDG, the corporate ESG indicators, that it can be easily fit to the industry sustainability strategies. Finally, in a nutshell, ASM can be conformal and sustainable and be part of this responsible sourcing and responsible supply chains in the world. We have proven that the use of recognized standards and frameworks, the miners can adopt the practices and connect, for instance, with the EU markets. But for the transformation into a legitimate and responsible and profitable activity, we need the industry, the governments to engage and support. So mining, especially gold mining, will continue, whether we like it or not. For instance, the industry actors that use gold have two options. They can pretend that it has nothing to do with them or make ASM part of their sustainability strategies, contribute to the sustainable development goals in ASM communities, and tell impactful stories to their customers. And just to that you have in mind, the companies can engage and they can have what they are also requiring in the EU regulations, such as assurance and risk mitigation, ESG and CSR impact, responsibility, and the add value. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Natalia, for the very insightful presentation, which already provides not only, of course, a clear indication of what has been the work of the Alliance for Responsible Mining in the past years and decades, but also through your activities and standards, also what is a little bit your conception of responsible sourcing in the ASM sector. Before going more again into this topic, I think we could start a little bit broader. From your slides and from your presentation, it comes very strongly the idea that artisanal small-scale mining has a strong role to play. It's already doing that, and probably also the potential to do more. However, there is still from some actors the attempt rather to neglect these actors, to leave them out of the conversation rather than perhaps facing the challenges that the sector is facing as the whole mining sector. Linking this to the conversation we're having today, where we talk about how can EU and Latin American countries find a common ground, align visions for responsible sourcing, and act upon this shared vision and agenda for the creation of secure supply chains. This is often a conversation which takes place at very high level. So it's a very formal conversation. It looks often at very big actors as governments or big industry players. We hear, I think, not that much about the smaller actors or artisanal small scale miners and how they can contribute to that. So maybe as a first question to you, what do you see the contribution of ASM to this type of conversation? So really governance, global supply chains, governance between different nations. What is the role that it can play, and where do you think we should start discussing more about the role that they can play?
Okay, thank you for the question. Actually, as I say in my presentation, we are not talking about just a few people. We're talking about almost 50 million people that are doing artisanal and small scale mining around the world. So it's a huge number to consider. Unfortunately, has been a sector that is quite excluded from this conversation because the risks that I mentioned. But I think that the persistent exclusion make the sector to be also in a vicious circle and affect the possibility to become formal, to get their own mining permits, and to be more engaged in the international and the EU supply chains. So the role that they can play, as I say, in our case with the implementation of this common definition of responsible ASM, is a way that they are also showing their efforts. We know many miners that they are willing to comply with the formalization in their countries, also to be better, to actually some of them are curious to how they can be better in some cases, but the issue and what affect them is that there are no like frameworks in the producing countries. The frameworks affect them to be formal, or there are no clear framework at all. So that is one point to consider for as I also say, they are making their jobs in their informal economies. So a role that they can play in this discussion about responsible mining is doing their job in a way that they can manage to be responsible, adopting, as I say, for instance, the craft code and the Fairmined standard, but they can do it. Even we have had like very responsible miners in remote areas, but if there are no policies in favor for commercialization of the gold where they are located, or there are no buyers, or the industry don't want to invest a little bit more, because actually, yes, that is a reality. If you want to make a change, if you want to make a positive transformation, you need to invest also in your provider of minerals, which can be the ASM. So it implies that they do, but all the stakeholders do their part, such as producing countries, such as also the importing minerals, importing countries as well, because we need also this kind of common language, what is responsible from the EU countries and what can be done as well as in the producing country, because this sometimes is a mismatch between both. And something very, very important to consider is that artisanal miners are usually or are from communities, from indigenous communities, from Afro-descendant communities. So it not only to have these frameworks about due diligence, about human rights, environmental, you also need to consider the realities, because the concept that they have of the tradition of their activity. So that would be very different the way as we think about mining in the European countries, and also in the producing countries that many of them also do, and in Latin America, so there's Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador. There are many artisanal miners that are also indigenous or Afro-descendant miners that it is also overlap with the traditionality of the way that they understand also their livelihoods.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, Adele. I think you raised different interesting points, starting from the last one that you just mentioned, which concerns the understanding of responsible sourcing per se. So how is responsible sourcing or mining understood? And as you mentioned, there may be very different conceptions underlying, given cultural factors and historical factors as well, of course, together with the difference between clearly being a producing country versus an importing country, which makes quite a lot of difference. Another point that you mentioned, it's what I take from your words is the willingness of great part of the artisanal and small scale mining sector to actually make progress towards formalization, towards adherence to certain standards and guidelines for responsible sourcing, but also some obstacles on the way. So you just mentioned already how important it is, the framework environment around ASM, which involves all the different actors, starting from policy to industry and also NGOs. Maybe if we had to come up with a sort of roadmap for making ASM more able to be part of these responsible mineral value chains between the EU and Latin America. In this case, of course, you deal particularly with gold, but it's also a discourse that can be taken outside of gold and replicated in for other minerals. What do you think should be the key steps actually for taking into account the role that all the different actors should and can play, for instance, focusing also on policy and industry? What do you see the key steps for making the ASM sector a more central part of these sustainable mineral supply chains?
Okay, maybe there are many keys. The important is maybe to work them to make the work together. One important piece of these key elements, I think, is the favorable condition for formalizations in the producing countries. What I mean, and differentiating approaches for the miners, because it's not the same to formalize artisanal miners that are partners, for instance, gold partners, and to also formalize miners that are growing in their projects and they are small companies or organizations. So different kind of approaches about the formalization of the sector, because usually the laws or the regulation are like established for the mining sector, but they are not have like real differentiation between medium, small, and artisanal. And also considering the priorities of the communities in their territory development, not only to imposing what is formalization from outside, but also building with the communities this formalization definition. So that is one point, very important. On the other hand, the specialization, what I mean. Miners, no matter if they are artisanal or small scale, need professional support. Administrative and organizational strengthening, mine planning, environmental management, health and safety, metallurgy, etc. So they need also services, specific services for their development. Another key element, I think, is easier access to mining rights and more progressive formalization for the ASM sector. In many producing countries in Latin America, the miners don't have that their titles to operate formally, that make it several conflicts with larger scale companies, and that also affect their opportunity to develop more stable businesses as ASM. Another one is the expectations. I think the EU conflict mineral regulation, or even that is based on the OECD due diligence guideline, has like higher expectations what we have in the reality. So if we take, for instance, in practice, the expectation from the ASN are often much higher than it can be done for the sector, both at the producer country and the part of the buyers, which are sometimes like very risk averse. So we need to also probably define ways to engage with legitimate but not fully formalized operations to make a change in the sector. So that is also a point to consider about what are the expectations and what is to be like really done. Otherwise, we will maintain the high level of informality and the high level of exclusion of the sector. And finally, I will say the continued presence on the ground, and that the companies also develop a relationship of trust. So that is also the co-responsibility between the miners and, for instance, the buyers and the government, so that each of the stakeholders involved put their contribution. So in that way, we have a common understanding and common actions about, as I say, expectation, specialization, professionalism of the activity, formalization. So and maybe the last one is right incentives and drivers for miners, buyers, and government. So we need to work what is the right balance in those two elements, incentives and drivers, because miners want to be more profitable as well. So they want to, and buyers want and looking for compliance, and government want export and taxes. So how we can align the needs of each on the no expectation in this case, but also the drivers and incentive for all the players. So what can be that middle ground and to add value, and also it can be translated in development for the ASN communities.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, Natalia. Indeed, these are many aspects that you mentioned, and the key probably is also to make them work all together. Also a little bit in the last aspect that you mentioned, in really finding alignment among all the needs and the different perspectives, of course, that each actor brings to the table. Maybe one question going more into the role that policy can play. As we mentioned before, whenever now it's a little bit of again a delicate geopolitical moment globally, where international relations are changing quite drastically, and let's say from the perspective of the EU, for instance, there is the need to find reliable partners who can not only guarantee resources for the for key sectors or transitions such as the sustainability transition, but also a digital transition. And on the other end, of course, also actors who are able to provide certain standards in terms of responsibility and sustainability. And in this kind of context, of course, the Latin American continent is gaining quite a lot of prominence in these relationships. Let's say, making the dialogues more frequent and encompassing in a way, all the different aspects. Now, one probably factor which is not often mentioned in this dialogue is exactly the role that ASM sector can play in this, and how it can be supported as well to become part of responsible mineral supply chains. I mean, to my understanding, this is something that it's quite scarce, but I would like to ask your confirmations as an expert, whether anything is happening in this regard in terms of intergovernmental dialogue on how responsible the ASM can take place. But I would also like to ask you then, what is required and what do we need to actually create more space for dialogues around that, right? So dialogues not only about what is responsible ASM, but also about how can governments support, say, in this case, the EU and the Latin American countries, how can they support together the development as well of the ASM sector? In terms of capacity, you mentioned before some other tools, like can be trade, can be finance. Where do you think there can be a little bit more value added on the side of this intergovernmental dialogue?
Okay, maybe there are several questions in the same one. So it's starting like about the role of the policies. We think in retrospective, before ASM sector wasn't in the international discussion, it was something like, I think that is a progress, that now we are talking 10 or 15 years after putting ASM on the agenda. Also, it's missing a lot of things to do, but I think it's a progress that we are already considering as a sector. And are with the development for instance, and the first application of the Fairmined standard was to show that, look, you think that sector was not possible to implement good practices and responsible practices, and they can do it with huge effort, but it's possible. So that is a good point, at least in terms of in the history of the ASM. And there are different initiatives that are taking on board the ASM voice. Let's say, for instance, the annual OECD Forum for Minerals, for Responsible Minerals and Supply Chains. They try to invite that the governments from the producing countries participate in this forum, and also the miners. Sometimes we support this connection, because it's not the same when you invite the miners to these high discussions, when there are mentioned different initiatives. So they do their activity, and sometimes they are, when talking to these high level plenaries, but they need a concrete solution about how can I maintain my title, that I can continue doing my activity, how can I improve my productivity, how can I change from mercury to more responsible environmental processing activities. So taking like to more practical, maybe could be as part of the solution of the last question you say about what could be important to create dialogue, but to dialogue around concrete action that matter also the miners. And I know that there are several other ones, as Minamata Convention about mercury, space, the European Partnership for Responsible Mineral is also looking for opportunities how to engage more strongly with the producing countries. It's in November will be the IGF forum, that is the where one of the agenda is the ASM. So I think it has been evolving, the importance of taking the ASM in the discussions. The regulation are also a huge example, that the concerns about the origin of the minerals, who are behind who are extracting the minerals, it also a huge steps. However, I think that is sometimes are taken from the app, and not taking from the top service, and not taking like a bottom up approaches, and thinking, well, okay, what are the real, as I say, what are the real needs of the communities? Because some of them are doing mining for surviving, or some of them have more advanced operation, but you need to think also what is happening on the ground. I know, so I think there are some spaces about dialogue. between Latin America and the EU on international, and putting the ASM in the agenda. Also some initiative from the industry, LBMA, RMI, RGC are also like making an effort to push their members to engage with the sector. So I think there are tools, dialogues, but what I think is missing is more effective like actions, I would say, because so as the regulation there are some dialogue space, but I think maybe all of these dialogues and conversation become only like voluntary from the corporation, so I can join or not join. So I don't know, it might be like minimum or desirable levels of contribution or support from the companies with the ASM might be like they, or at least they show that they are making a mix, let's say, between ASM, large scale mining, and I don't know, recycle and other sources. So they are showing what they are doing, what role they are playing to contribute with the ASM sector. And there are different ways, as I say, with the sourcing from the sector. If that is too complex, the supply chains from the sector. So there are other ways of project support, co-financing. So that is what can I say? But yeah, my concern is that it's still perceived like a choice of how we make like a mainstream that is necessary to have a proactive engagement with the sector. And because I perceive it's still like the involvement is minimal, it's still very, very small. So yeah, and these dialogues, there are programs, Planet Goal that is managed, but that is helping the reduction and the elimination of mercury. So there are spaces, but I think it's more moving from concrete action that also matter to the miners.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Natalia. Maybe as a last question, concluding our conversation, I would like to look a bit more broadly based on the inputs you just provided as well. So, as you mentioned, responsible ASM has been discussed more and more recently, but often as well, or in many cases, as a problem to be solved, right? Rather than an opportunity to take advantage of. Now, if we instead take ASM as an opportunity for building a responsible supply chains, which also leads us to think a bit more deeply about different understandings of responsible sourcing, which is linked to what you mentioned before as well, how this might differ between communities being active in ASM with respect to consumers in the EU, for instance. Looking at this conversation of creating an agenda for responsible sourcing, which is agreed by all actors, and actually which can, as you just mentioned, incentivize more effective action and more rapid action as well. My last question would be, what do you think is the main, what do you think are the main lessons that we can learn, or the main, let's say, changes in our mindset that we get once we take the perspective of ASM as a legitimate, but also as a value-adding actor in international responsible mineral supply chains? So instead of seeing ASM as a problem, if we see it as an opportunity, as an actor that is at the same level of the other stakeholders, what lessons can we take when we have to think about creating this agenda? What do you think are the main takeaways for the way we let's say, face not only the discussion, but also set up tables for action?
Okay, so lesson learned will be like the perception of risks. As I say, in one of the previous questions, there is like the bar that sometimes put the industry and also the legislation for importing minerals from ASM is maybe too high. So how come, and So, and the perception of risk. So if they say it's too risky to buy from the miners, that's why they don't engage. So taking again the definition of risks and what could be like the like changing the risk perception, and also supporting the miners that are doing their best even in conflict areas. But it's so complicated. For instance, I take the example of my country, Colombia. So we know that there is still conflict in the territories and in the rural areas. So if you think in general, so all mining, even large, medium, are affected by conflict. So we must not extract gold and sell it from any part to the world. So thinking the risks, if the companies are already buying from a large scale because they think it's less risks, but even it's from the same region. So also, and you prefer not buying because it might be more risky to buy from the small companies. So I think the definition of risks is important to take into account, and that implies that maybe companies that say a more progressive approach. So there are miners that are showing their efforts, they are legitimate, but they are not, as I say, fully formalized, because that is also a problem, that sometimes there are also very committed companies to buy, but I want to buy from Honduras, let's say, and they find that it's only one, a small scale operation that is formal. So it's also complicated from that other perspective. So I think that taking formalization in a step-by-step approach, and that also facilitate to the definition of risks, that maybe facilitate the engagement from the industry, because otherwise the bar is still too high, and they affect the inclusion of the responsible miners. What else? I think another lesson learned is the sector still need, as I say, technical support. There are programs, yes, for the reduction of mercury, but that is a point that is necessary to get green technologies with the procession, their operations. Why no? The connection of the ASM miner with carbon market opportunities. We know that this is a priority, the climate change, how we contribute to a fair and just transition. So the sector needs to play also a role, because they are a good example of resilience in the community that might be more vulnerable to the climate change consequences. So I think that it could be changing the way as we perceive risks, also considering that it's necessary more investment in the sector. One issue that affects ASN around the world, because as they are perceived as very risky, is the access to banking services. That affects considerably the creation of formal supply chains. So that is necessary, like the banking sector also identify ways to feel like comfortable in the risk mitigation about money laundering, conflict, and so on. But they also open opportunities to the miners, because we know that there are rural communities that are selling coffee, cocoa. So why the miners that sometimes are also involved in these agricultural activities, but as they are miners, and mining is perceived as a high risk activity, they are not allowed to enter to the international financial system. So I think that will be like the main lesson learned, and also thinking about as I say, the bar of the expectation, how we can manage what is really possible to do, put it on the board. Okay, miners who have adopted the best practice can manage to get this. The one that are just starting can get this. So it's possible that responsible buyers maybe reduce that huge expectation and also engage and make a transformation. And also the governments, maybe how they can speed up process for formalization, for that the miners are also have a role in their countries and how their titles to operate.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Natalia. Indeed, I think in the end, the picture that counts is let's consider ASM as an opportunity. It's a big one. Let's be aware of how many people are already involved in there. You mentioned as one of your first numbers, 50 million people globally in 120 countries involved in ASM. And an opportunity, of course, not only for those involved into the sector, but also for the wider ecosystem. I think starting from industry, so they could become partners, leading up to governments and the creation of this international supply chain. So that's probably the first step to have a bit more of a concrete and actionable agenda for moving in that direction. Natalia, thank you very much for your time and expertise today. It has been a real pleasure. I think it's a strong call for including ASM actors into these types of conversation, while perhaps before were have been neglected and faced in a different setting. So this has been very useful. This is definitely something that at Resourcing will keep talking about and discussing. For now, yeah, I wish you a very nice rest of the day. Thank you for your participation and best of luck with your work at the Alliance for Responsible Mining.
Thank you so much. It was a big pleasure to be.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Natalia.